Hey everybody, this is Brian Zielinski with another edition of Connected Insights. Today we're especially excited about Andrea Herran joining us from FocusHR.
Oh, thank you, Brian. I have been doing HR now for 35 years in total. I went out on my own about 18 years ago with a focus on small businesses. I enjoy helping small businesses because they're the foundation of our communities. You know, small businesses is what makes us. And that's who I want to serve. You know, I like to work directly with owners and founders of companies to make sure that they enjoy their company, they're getting the most out of it, and that they're having a great business that they want to hand down and keep growing.
Do you find that companies are willing to start to look at HR? What becomes a kind of a break point for them to pivot away from I'm surviving or I just want to take care of my customer base to now I need to start taking care of my people?
It's a great question. And essentially what happens is because owners, founders are wearing all these different hats, like you said, accounting, sales, marketing, operations, client retention, all of this, they get to a point where it becomes overwhelming. It's, you know, they're no longer an octopus. They've become like a millipede. There's just too many hands, too many things to do. So they start getting overwhelmed, which means they have to bring in other people into the business to be able to service their clients. And they want their clients to be serviced in the same manner that they would. Absolutely, because that is how you build the business. Because people go into business based on their specialty, not on their leadership skills. So what we find with owners, like for example, if they're starting out with their first employee, is, believe it or not, the hardest part for them is the letting go. I'm just going to pick a position. Most people usually start like with an accounting person. You know, I need somebody to keep my books, you know, part-time while I do the rest. So what that happens then is they want the person to do the accounting, but then they're like going, well, let me see the checks that came in. Let me see the invoices that go out.
Sure.
So they never let go because they're still in the process. So one of the first things that we have to deal with is, how do you let go? What does that mean to let go? What is it that you need to know from this person in order to have the confidence that they're doing it? Now, granted, this confidence isn't going to come overnight. I mean, we're
Sure.
realistic, you know, it takes time, but you've got to build that up and you've got to understand what it is this person's going to be doing and that you don't need to do. You know, and this could be with any position, whether it's like I mentioned, you know, like an accountant or a bookkeeper, but it could be the person who answers the phone or the person who greets the patient, the customer, the client that walks in the door, you know, and it's really understanding what this other person is going to be doing.
Yep.
And what does that take off of your plate? And the key there is it's taking it off. You've got to hand it over. A lot of people have a tendency like, but if I hand it over, I lose control. No. You don't lose control. Let's talk about how do you keep up with what's going on? One, without micromanaging.
Sure.
Two, without making the person feel that they can't breathe because you're constantly on top of them. So what does that look like? Once we know what the position is going to be, how it's going to work, then you go find someone that fits that. The tendency is, oh, but my neighbor said that their daughter can help me out.
Yeah.
You know, or their son can help me out. So I'm just going to hire them. But you haven't put in the work ahead of time. So what are they going to do? Are they qualified? They may be great, or maybe their parents are great. Them, maybe not so much. Who knows? You know, you got to you got to put in some structure before you start bringing in people. And I just want to point this out too, because sometimes people hear job descriptions, operating procedures. It's like, oh, that's so much paper. That's so much documentation. I don't have that. Honestly, when they're starting out, even if it's just a handwritten on a notepad, just something to start the relationship and to guide it, that's great. Formalizing it can be done a little bit later because I will tell you, especially with that first person, what you initially write down and what the position evolves to, you know, 2 or 3 months down the road may not look the same.
Right.
So I don't want people to get caught up and it's got to be perfect before you hire somebody. No, we
Hmm.
have to have just a framework and then be flexible enough to adapt it and change and course correct and finalize it. I mean, you're going to have it more documented, but it can wait, a month or two as you try to figure out what that balance is and how it looks and how it's going to work.
What do people start to do to develop their people and to develop their own leadership skills as managers and owners?
Yeah, it's and I love seeing those numbers because,
Hmm.
those of us in HR have been preaching it without the
Yeah.
numbers, for a long time. So it's
Yeah.
nice to be validated. It's when a person gets into a leadership position as a business owner. I went through it myself. I did this on my own for a long time, and now I've got a team, I've got 9 employees now. And uh, first thing you have to come to is you got to figure out how you're going to be as a leader. And what I'm talking about there is all companies have different leadership styles, different cultures, different values.
Hmm.
So you have to take a look at what it is and how you want to come across to your team. What kind of a business do you want? You know, uh, for example, people that are in a more technical field, whether it's like programming or accounting and so forth, they have a tendency, not always, to be very task orientated. This comes
Sure.
in, you do this, that goes out. That's fine because probably the people you're hiring are of the same mentality. But you have to understand that as a leader, you have to learn to communicate with different styles. Some people may be more direct, some may be not so direct.
Hmm.
Do you want to be more a collaborative environment? Do you want to be able to talk to your people and get ideas? Or you just like, I just need you to do the work.
Hmm.
There's nothing wrong with either one of those. You just have to be clear on who you are. So
Yeah.
you present that to people as they come in or before they start during the interview process. It's when you say you're one and then in reality you're the other,
Yeah.
that will turn people off because now they feel it's been like a bait and switch, and it's
Hmm.
not the company that they thought it was. So once you're clear on that, and education development comes in a lot of different forms. From
Yeah.
the HR side, we're always talking to managers and leaders of our clients about, how do you talk to Fred? How do you talk to Wilma when there's issues? How do we have a conversation that is productive? And we walk them through that. We don't expect that, people have a tendency to believe leadership is born. It's not. It's learned. It's experience. It's
Sure.
training. And so once you've figured out how you want to be, because you kind of got to do that first, because that kind of sets the tone.
Yep.
Then when you take a look at development, take a look at how do you want to do it? Do you want to do what's called micro learnings? So look, we're going to do an all team meeting once a week, once a month, once a quarter, whatever is right for your business. And we take 20 minutes at each of those meetings to touch on a topic that's educational and relevant to our industry. Are we going to do separate training days of things like that? Or, go out to the team and say, hey, what is it that you want to know? What is it that can be developed? Now, we do this as part of, we encourage our clients to do quarterly check ins.
Okay.
Performance reviews is a whole different thing. I'm not going to get into that. Um, Part of that check in, one of the questions we want everybody to ask is, what do you need from me to succeed? That question, if you ask it every quarter, we'll give you what you need to train on for
Mhm.
that quarter. Because people are telling you. So that means that they're going to be interested. They're going to show up. They're going to participate. And it doesn't always have to be an outside person. For example, like if I'm making something up, I want to learn how to do pivot tables in Excel. Okay, let me see. But you know what? I've got, Betty in accounting who does great at that. Maybe I'll talk to her and see if she can just set up a 15-minute, session on what a pivot table is and how to do it. So there's, take advantage of the rest of your team members on where
Sure.
their strengths are to teach the rest. Sometimes we think of development always has to be external. great benefits to that, but sometimes don't forget your own people, and they appreciate being able to share, to show off their expertise. That makes
Yep.
them feel seen and valued and part of the team.
Would you be able to walk us through with some specifics around those different phases of a business and what the HR journey looks like for a company? What should you start to put in place for early stage businesses, kind of mid stage scaling businesses, and then more established businesses?
When you're starting out, what I really like to get companies to do before they hire their first person or within those first couple employees, I like to do employee handbooks. The reason being, people are like, oh, that's, who reads them? I get it. I understand. I'm very well aware of what an employee handbook is and how employees use it. But here's the thing. When putting together an employee handbook, we have a lot of conversations about what are your policies? What do you want to do about attendance, benefits,
Yeah.
holidays, time off? You know, we ask all those questions. And if you can decide those
Mhm.
before you hire your first employee, you can say, hey, we've already thought of all this. This is what we can offer you. This is what we're going to do. It's all laid out here. Because an employee handbook is twofold. It gives the employee the expectations of what you expect from them. And it also gives them what they can expect from you as a business. So it's a great way to handle both of those. And obviously there's legalities because the government
Sure.
is puts its own requirements in based on your size.
Okay.
So we like working with that because what we see happen is, well, I hired Fred and Fred only wanted 2 weeks vacation. But then when I went to go hire Wilma, she wanted 3 weeks. And then I went to go hire Barney and he wanted 4 weeks. So I've got everything all over the place. So by doing this ahead of time, not saying you can't be flexible, but to at least set standards to start from. And you can create some consistency. So there doesn't appear on face value that there's favoritism or so and so is getting treated differently than me, because of whatever factor.
Yeah.
We like that consistency across the board. Um, that's the best place to start,
Okay.
uh, especially when you just have a few.
Mhm.
Because when you're first starting out, it's about the legalities, it's about compliance, it's about um, what the government expectations are, through uh, equal pay, benefits, and it depends on your state. Some states have more, some states have less. Some states say, well, whatever the federal government says. Other states, it's like, yeah, that's nice, but here's all of ours.
Right.
And it can change by municipality. You may be in a city or a county that has different
Hmm.
regulations. So we don't want anybody being caught off guard about what those regulations are.
Okay.
So when they start, we do that. We like to talk them through, because we get this with a lot of new businesses when they hire their first employee, is what kind of a payroll system do you need? What kind of insurance do you need?
Right.
Before you start paying your first employee, you need to make sure that you're set up as an employer for both federal and state, that you're
Mhm.
set up with unemployment insurance, workers' comp insurance, different things like that. EPLI, that's Employment Practices Liability Insurance, which is cheap and I recommend everybody to get. Um, so we're going to be focused on that kind of stuff when you first start. Now, when you go into growth phase, from an HR perspective, there's three things that we want to look at. One, depending on the numbers, are there any additional laws that you need to be aware of? When you hit 50 employees, there's a couple additional laws that kick into place.
Okay.
That's one. Two, as you grow, sometimes what happens is you can lose your culture. You can lose the feel, the personality of working in
Sure.
that business. So we take a look at how do we ensure that we keep the culture regardless of the size, because it's very easy for that to change. Because you've got more people, and if you're not keeping in touch, things can get lost there. And lastly, and this is like this is one of the things I really like working on, is let's take a look at your organization. And when you grow, what does that mean? So if you're like manufacturing, you can say, you know what, we have to grow more than 50% before I need to bring on a new person, because the machinery and the systems we have can adjust with that volume. If you're
Sure.
service-based, it may be like, every 2 or 3 clients, I need an extra person, so it all depends on your business model. So we take a look at that and we walk that through. And what are the trigger points? What's going to trigger the need for another person? And how far in advance can we anticipate when that will happen? So we can be prepared. So we're not drowning our team, because it's like, oh, we hit that point, we didn't plan for it, and now I've got to find somebody, and everybody else is starting to get burnt out. So how can we, you know, minimize that, so that it happens on a very short term. And then, so those are the 3 things that we look at when you're growing. A big focus on culture, because that's usually the biggest thing that takes a hit as
Wow.
companies or practices get bigger.
Okay.
And then once you're full grown, it's about maintaining. It's about, what are we doing extra? How do we retain our people, and how do we keep people happy? Do they have career paths? Is there a way to move up in the organization? Or is it just lateral? What are those opportunities there that exist?
What areas of opportunity do you see right now to gain an advantage in terms of recruiting?
Well, I think one of the things that smaller businesses, um, they need to tout more of the benefits of being a smaller business and not being part of the Fortune 500 where you're one of 10,000 people. When you're working with a small business, it's not just your role. You get to see the whole company. You get a big picture
Mhm.
of what everything that is happening. And that will grow you in your role. You know, um, I'll use a classic example. In big companies, sales and marketing are 2 very separate departments that, if you're lucky, there's some connection,
Right.
because it's personally, I've seen it where what the marketing and what they sell you are 2 different things. It's like, well,
Yes.
I
Yes.
don't understand. But in a small business, not only is it probably maybe the same person, or if it's 2 people, they're actually sitting like right next to each other. So they're talking. There's that integration. So they see that. Um, is it hard to compete with big businesses as far as salaries and benefits? Yes.
Yeah.
So you know what? Don't. That's not what you're competing on. You're going to be competing on, hey, you get to be involved in more than just your role. You are not going to be so specialized that you're just slot
Mhm.
into this little hole. As a smaller company, you get to see a lot more. And because we're smaller, we have flexibility. We understand that if you're going through a tough time, with your family, whatever that is, we can work with you on that. There's flexibility, there's empathy. Um, there is work-life balance. Like you did the EY example. Now, my understanding, and I don't know if it's changed, you go to EY, you're going to be there working 60 to 80 hours a week
Sure. Yep.
minimum.
Yep.
But if you're working for a small accounting firm, yeah, you know what, you may get that during, a few times of the year. And I've worked with accounting firms, they're like, yeah, we've got our peak periods, but you know what? Summers are quiet. And guess what? This is how we compensate you. You get more time off in the summer. And who doesn't want more time off in the summer when it's
Yep.
nice out?
Yep.
It's we have to sell more of the intrinsic benefits of being part of a smaller company than just pay and health insurance.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
You got to talk about the atmosphere. You're going to know your coworkers. You're going to hang out with them. You know, you may or may not like them. That's a different. But
Yeah.
there's other benefits to small business, and that's what we need to talk about more. If you look nationwide, I believe the statistics are 80% of all companies have less than 200 employees.
What are some of the more, first of all, maybe an overview of what you cover with a helpline support, but what are some of the more common issues? Is there any trends you've seen? There was COVID that happened, there's been the post-COVID world, and then, businesses facing some pressure from economic standpoints? I mean, how does that impact trends you see with questions you're getting through the helpline?
Sure. Just a brief rundown of what the helpline is
Yeah.
it is a service where you can call, email, text, any other form of communication. You can ask questions or review situations and get answers. And if we don't answer right away, we do respond within 4 hours because 4 business hours, because we realize that HR situations are usually a little bit more urgent because it involves
Sure.
people. People want to get feedback. The kinds of questions we get, like you mentioned, COVID. Oh my gosh, the first question is, what does this mean? What do we do? How do we do this? You
Hmm.
have to remember that pre-COVID, remote work wasn't that common.
Yeah.
So we would get a lot of calls going, how do we do this remote thing? It's like, okay, and we'd go back, let's talk about equipment. Do they have equipment? How are you getting it to them? How are they going to sign onto your networks? We had to go like that basic to get
Yeah.
started. As we came out, it was okay, but somebody tested positive for COVID. What does that mean? Walking them through that, still dealing with a little bit of that question about what does it mean when somebody tests positive for COVID, and we're on the um, CDC helpline, site to see what the latest
Yes,
things are, because some companies are different. You know, um, we've got a couple clients that either the people that work there or they are living with people who are still that are immunocompromised. So they take a stricter view on how they deal with that, where other
Mhm.
companies are like, no, everybody's pretty healthy. So, they have a more lax. So we adjust according to what their particular needs are.
Sure.
Get that. We get the like this year. What is this thing about non-competes? What does that mean? What does this change in the minimum salary to be considered exempt? That
Hmm.
Department of Labor put through, and it's what is a duties test, So walking them through that. I saw something on the news about, my state is now requiring time off. What does that mean to me? But I have a time off policy. Do I need to change it? And we talk them through because there's a few follow-up questions to that. That's not just a quick yes, no answer. It's like, well, what's your current policy? Let's take a look at what the state requires. No, you're fine, or here's a slight change you have to make. Um, to just employee situations, Fred and Barney are constantly arguing with each other. How do we get this to stop? How do we fix this? How do we get them just to work together? I don't care if they like each other, but they got to work together. How do
Sure.
we do that?
How do you see companies navigating digital change with their employees?
It's very much like any other change management process.
Hmm.
You've got to start off with why. Why are we doing the change? Not just that
Sure.
we're doing a change. So, with systems talking to each other, whether it's with AI or some other kind of feed that gets systems to
Hmm.
talk to each other. Why are we doing this? Well, the bigger picture, it's about efficiency. It's about doing things a little bit faster. You know, AI is great with taking loads of data and being able to summarize it into something that you can use.
Right.
So you have to let people understand the bigger picture and give them time to digest it. They're not going to just accept it 5 minutes after you say it because you said it. Answer their questions, answer their concerns. And if it's somebody's role specifically, like your example of somebody who does data in one and then data to the other,
Hmm.
and if there is a something that's created to have them automatically talk to each other, the best way to help people get through that is have them be part of the project so they can understand it, they can see it. They're going
Yeah.
to know what's works, what doesn't work, what's missing. It's like,
Mm.
yeah, out of the 4 fields that came over, only 3 did. Why didn't it grab that one? And that one's important because it connects to this and this and this over here. Whereas somebody maybe on the programming side doesn't understand the big picture of both systems. So get them involved in it. They may find that they like it and they want to keep being involved in some way, shape, or form. And yes, you will get people that'll be like, nope, not for me, not interested, and you're trying to do everything you can for them. it's possible that it's just time to say, this is the direction we're going in, and you need to decide whether or not you're with us, or if you're on board
Yeah.
with this or not.
Yeah.
I always like to give people that option, because people will be honest with themselves, and this is a long process. We're not talking, again, this is not a one day to the next day decision, to say that to folks. People are always scared of change. They're always nervous of change. It's what it is. It's not that they're scared of change. They're scared of the unknown. They don't know what
Yeah.
this means. And depending on their role, and just, how there's certain people that like predictability always. Some people are comfortable with change. It's like, yeah, just give me a bigger idea and then I'll figure it out. And others are like, nope, I like that when I come in, I do this, I can expect this, and I do that, and that's the end of my day. Those are the people that are typically more resistant to change, those that really like that consistency and predictability in their day. So you have to involve them in the change. They will either accept it because they were part of it, or they're going to be totally against it. And this can take, depending on the project and what you're doing, this may take a couple months, but give them the opportunity, and if they're like, well, this doesn't work, well, tell me why it doesn't work. What are you seeing? And listen to them. You really have got to listen and give them that attention and be empathetic and say, okay, I understand what you're saying. So how can we fix this? How can we get you involved in here to help fix this so this doesn't become a bigger issue down the road?
Yeah.
Most people will, if you give them the attention and the authority to take a look at possible solutions, most likely they will be on board with it. It's when you just say, nope, just do it, I don't care what you think. That's where you get a lot of pushback. That's where
Yeah.
you're going to get a lot of resistance, because you have to remember that the people working for you are people. They're human. They want to feel heard. They want to feel appreciated. They want to feel understood. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but they need to feel that. So give them that, and if there is a difference of opinion, talk to them why, let them understand your reasoning, your logic as much as you can.
Yeah. No, I think it's that's a great topic to end on, because I think it's a topic, the technology change that's ahead of us, right on the horizon, really, is going to impact jobs. It's going to impact, in my hope, I think a lot of it's just going to impact the work you do. There might be opportunity for people to shift and get into more productive roles, learn something
Yeah.
new, learn how to leverage these tools, and really just make the company smarter. Make everybody's life a little easier. That's what should unfold from those, technology projects, and then getting the employees behind those projects. Um, Overall, I think this is a great analysis of kind of where the HR world is right now and where small businesses need to be. I strongly encourage, the helpline as a tool, just a starting point. Like anything, what's the starting point? We get that question all the time. What's my starting point for growth? We're trying to achieve this growth goal. We're trying to achieve this goal in our company. We always look for those services that are, let's help you get a foundation. And I think helpline is a good way. And I do encourage, everybody check out Andrea's profile on Shape Connect, understand her experience a little bit more in depth. And, I think we'll have another conversation soon, because there's so many topics around HR that we could delve into, much more, in depth. So I appreciate your time today, Andrea. It really was helpful here.
No, well, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity. This has been great. I love talking about this stuff.
Sure. Excellent. Well, we will talk to you again soon.